Welcome to the Corkery Kitchen Commentary. My name is Dennis Corkery, and today we're answering the question, how can we know that God exists? And our reading today from God's holy word is found in Romans chapter 1. If you have your Bible handy, you can turn there. But Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. And I'm reading from the ESV version of the Bible. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God hath shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. Thank you for joining us today at the kitchen table here at the Corkery home. And I want to just say that I hope that in your home you're opening the Bible together with your wife, with your children, with your husband, with your family members. I hope the Bible isn't just sitting on the shelf in your home. I hope that you're opening it. I hope you're reading it. I hope you're meditating upon it. I hope you're applying it to your life, and I hope that you're glorifying God. And I just want to remind you that that's the end or the purpose for which God created us. So this is the idea behind the Corkery Kitchen Commentary. We want to encourage people to open the Bible in their homes, to read it, to study it, to live by it, and to worship the God who inspired it. Now let's get back to our question again this morning. How can we know that God exists? Some people claim that it's impossible to know whether or not God exists. And today there are more and more people who call themselves atheists. So is it really possible to know for certain that God exists? And I'll begin by answering that question by saying a little bit about what we call the scientific method. If we rely solely upon the scientific method, then I will concede it is not possible to prove the existence of God. Let me state that another way. We cannot prove the existence of God by the scientific method. Now, what is the scientific method? The scientific method is a method of study and examination whereby scientists establish certain laws and certain hypotheses in the search for truth and reality. Now, I don't want to speak disparagingly about the scientific method. It is a very valid method when it's limited to the material world. But that's one of the problems with the scientific method. It can't explore the world beyond us or the metaphysical world. It can't explore questions that are beyond the things that are seen and felt and touched and visible. Now, what is the scientific method? The scientific method begins by making observations. Then a hypothesis is established. And then there are experiments and tests applied to see whether that hypothesis stands up under testing and scrutiny. So when we understand what the scientific method is, we realize its limitations. And again, it cannot explore things that are of a metaphysical or spiritual nature. Now, let me say this. If God exists, do you really think that he could exist if he's infinite, sovereign, almighty, all-powerful, all-glorious, all-majestic, all-good and wonderful? Would it be possible for a God who is of such a nature as the Bible describes to be completely unknowable? Well, I don't really think so. There is a way that we can know that God exists. And the answer to that question is, we know that God exists because of revelation. Now let me say that again. We know that God exists because of revelation. Now, what is revelation? There are two types of revelation. The first type is general revelation, and the second type is special revelation. What is general revelation? Well, general revelation is what is described in the verses that we read from Romans chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. When we look at the world, the visible world, the world that God created, it's as if we see the fingerprints of God, just like a detective would go into a crime scene. Did he see the criminal? Did he see the murderer? Was he a witness to the diabolical crime that took place? No. But he can examine the scene of the crime. He can take fingerprints. And from those fingerprints, he can deduce that there was a man, a human being, involved in the crime. And when he examines the fingerprints more closely and applies them to the records that they have in the police computers, he can identify the very man that committed the crime by the fingerprints and by other evidence that's gathered at the crime scene. And so it is with God. When we look at the universe and we see the beauty, the order, the magnitude of creation, we can really come to no other conclusion than that a God or God made the universe. And the Bible tells us that there is one God. So this is general revelation. It's the revelation of God in nature, in creation, and in the world. What is special revelation? Well, we're not going to be able to get to that today, but I'll just say very briefly that special revelation is what we ascribe to the Holy Scriptures. They were written by men, but inspired by God. Now, I'm going to just confine myself to general revelation today, and there are some different categories that we'll talk a little bit further today. Now, under the heading of general revelation, we can talk about three things. There are probably many more subheadings under general revelation, but I want to just think about the main ones. And these are the cosmological argument, number one, the teleological argument, number two, and the moral argument, number three. Those are the three I want to touch on. There are more subheadings under general revelation, but we really don't have the time in this video. Now, let's begin with the cosmological argument for the existence of God. What is the cosmological argument? Well, the cosmological argument is the law of cause and effect. Now, I'm sure all of you have heard of that either in elementary school or in high school. If you've been to high school, you've heard of the law of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect says that every effect must have a cause. There's no exemptions from that law. Every effect must have a cause. It's a must. So when we look at the world around us, when the scientist takes out his telescope and looks into the sky and into the universe and sees its vastness, he sees that it's immeasurable. He sees its beauty and order and the wonder of it all. He's left with a question in his mind. What is the cause? What was the cause of all that we see, of all of the splendor and beauty that we see in the world around us? And we know that the only plausible explanation is that God created the heavens and the earth. And this is told us right in the book of Genesis, chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, there's never been a better explanation given for the order that's in the world. Now, I want to think about, I mentioned the stars in the universe and the scientist with his telescope that looks out into the stars. But another good example of cause and effect, which leads us to the conclusion that God exists, is something that is very wonderful to consider, And it really stimulates our thought when we think about human DNA. Now I want to read a quote here from Dr. Francis Collins, who's the director, or who was the director of the Human Genome Project. And this doctor, Dr. Francis Collins, is the man who mapped out the human DNA structure. And this is what he said. He said this. He said, think of DNA as an instructional script, a software program sitting in the nucleus of the cell. Now let me read this again. Dr. Francis Collins, director of the Human Genome Project that mapped out the human DNA structure, said that one can think of DNA as an instructional script, a software program sitting in the nucleus of a cell. Now another man here that I'm going to quote, a man named Perry Marshall, an informational specialist, comments on the implications of this. Now he's commenting on the implications of Francis Collins' statement that DNA is like an instructional script or a software program. And this was what he said. There has never existed a computer program that wasn't designed. Whether it is a code or a program or a message given through a language, there is always an intelligent mind behind it. DNA is like a script. It's like a instructional program. And there has never been a software program or a language or a code that ever existed without a programmer. And of course, we must conclude that the programmer is God. Now, it's been estimated that the DNA information in a single human cell would fill 1,000 volumes of average-sized books. One cell. 1,000 volumes worth of information, all in sequential order. And if that order were altered, the message would be scrambled up and undiscernible and unfunctionable. So when we think of all of that, it's absurd to conclude that all this coding and messaging in the human DNA could possibly have happened by chance or randomly. And yet that's what the atheists want us to conclude. Now I think we have a much stronger position than the atheist. And I haven't spoken yet of special revelation. I'm still on the topic of general revelation. So the law of cause and effect. The universe is a cause, an effect. And it must have a cause. And the only plausible cause is the existence and the creating power of Almighty God. Let's go now to the teleological argument. Now, I assume many of you have heard of the teleological argument, and it's the argument that addresses our observation of design in the universe. There is obvious design and order in the universe, and we call this argument the teleological argument. And one of the interesting things, or interesting examples of this teleological quality of our world and universe is what we call the anthropic principle. Now, what is the anthropic principle? The anthropic principle speaks to the observation that there is fine-tuning in this world and universe in which human beings live. And what we're describing when we refer to the anthropic principle is that everything in this world is fine-tuned and seems to be ordered and structured in order to make human life possible, so that humans can thrive, so that humans can live, and so that humans can prosper in this world. Now, there's a few examples of this, and I want to first of all just read a quotation from Dr. Hugh Ross. And this is what he says about the anthropic principle. The anthropic principle says that the universe appears designed for the sake of human life. Did you get that? The anthropic principle says that the universe appears to be designed for the sake of human life. More than a century of astronomy and physics research yields this unexpected observation. The emergence of humans and human civilization requires physical constants, laws, and properties that fall within certain narrow ranges. And this truth applies not only to the cosmos as a whole, but also to the galaxy, planetary system, and planet humans occupy. To state the principle more dramatically, a preponderance of physical evidence points to humanity as the central theme of the cosmos. Now, I find that quotation fascinating, and I know that this principle is a true principle. And notice how Ross says that more than a century of astronomy and physics yields this observation. It's not made just by what some might call theistic zealots. No, it's made by physicians, yeah, and those who study astronomy and physics, and it's yielded this observation. And I also like this part here. It says that the properties fall within a narrow range. Everything is so tightly ordered to support human life that it seems to suggest that the world and the universe was created to be a man-centered world in which man could thrive and prosper. Now, I'll read another little quotation here that gives us a clear definition of what the anthropic principle is. The anthropic principle is relating to human beings or their existence. Principle means law. The anthropic principle is the law of human existence. It is well known that our existence in the universe depends on numerous cosmological constants and parameters whose numerical values must fall within a very narrow range of values. If even a single variable were off even slightly, we would not exist. Isn't that interesting? The extreme improbability that so many variables would align so auspiciously in our favor merely by chance has led some scientists and philosophers to propose instead that it was God who providentially engineered the universe to suit our specific needs. This is the anthropic principle, that the universe appears to be fine-tuned to support our existence. And that quotation is from gotquestions.org-anthropic-principle. Now, isn't that interesting? These variables are so closely aligned to favor human life. If any of these variables were even altered a little bit, human life would be annihilated. And there are some examples here that I'd like to go over with you that highlight or that illustrate the anthropic principle. First of all, we could think of oxygen or our atmosphere. There's no other planet in the entire solar system that has an atmosphere like the planet Earth. If we didn't have this atmosphere around the Earth, we would be scorched by the sun above us. We wouldn't be able to breathe. The Earth would not be able to support human life. So we have just the right mixture of oxygen and hydrogen and other gases. If there was too much oxygen, if there was too much carbon, if there was too much nitrogen, if these mixtures of gases were altered, then human life could not be supported on the earth in which we live. We can think about the earth's distance from the sun. If the earth were merely 1% closer to the sun, the oceans would vaporize, preventing the existence of life. So the tilt of the earth's axis, if it was tilted a little bit more towards the sun, we would be scorched. And if it were a little bit altered the other way, it would be too cold to support human life on earth. And the ozone level in the atmosphere. Life on earth survives because the ozone level is within a safe range for habitation. However, if the ozone level were much greater, it would lead to too little UV radiation for adequate plant growth. So all of these factors in the world, there's so many, we could go on and describe these things that if anything were altered just a little, the gases, the distance of the earth from the sun, and on it goes, then human life would not be possible in this world. So there we have the anthropic principle, and it shows us that the world was designed and ordered for human existence, and this is the teleological argument. I think that's about as far as we'll go today. We've covered quite a bit of ground, and I want to thank you for joining us here at the kitchen table in the Corkery home with our Bibles open, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you for joining us.